Look at the salt shaker on your table. Go ahead, pick it up. That thing costs almost nothing. You probably don't think about it. You use it without thinking, put it down without thinking, and forget it exists until you need it again. For most of human history, what you're holding right now was more valuable than gold. Wars were fought over it. Cities were built to control it. Empires rose and fell because of who had access to it and who didn't. The word salary comes from the Latin word for salt, because Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it. The phrase, "not worth his salt," dates to a time when that was a genuine financial evaluation. Mahatma Gandhi chose salt, specifically salt, as the symbol of his resistance to the British Empire. Not because it was symbolic, because it was the thing that ordinary people needed every single day and couldn't get without paying the British crown for the privilege. What if salt had never existed? Not just as a seasoning, as a preservative, a currency, a weapon, a reason for war. The world you know would be unrecognizable. The mineral that kept civilization alive. Before refrigerators, before canning, before any of the technologies we use to keep food from rotting, there was salt. This is the thing most people don't understand about salt. It wasn't valuable because it made food taste better. It was valuable because without it, food didn't last. Meat, salted properly, could survive months, even years. Unsalted meat in summer heat was inedible within days. Fish, caught in abundance during one season, could feed a community through the winter, but only if it was salted fast enough and well enough. Salt was not a luxury. It was a technology. The only preservation technology that worked at scale for most of human history. And every civilization that wanted to survive beyond a single harvest needed to control it. The earliest evidence of salt production dates back around 8,000 years to salt springs in Romania, where Neolithic people were boiling brine to extract crystals long before written language existed. In ancient China, battles were fought over salt lakes in Shanxi province as early as the 3rd millennium BC. The city of Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth, was established near the Dead Sea partly because of access to salt. Salt shaped where cities were built. The great ancient cities of the Mediterranean, Carthage, Venice, Genoa, were not great because of their harbors alone. They were great because they controlled salt supplies that the entire region depended on. Venice's rise to become the dominant trading power of the medieval Mediterranean was built substantially on its monopoly over the salt marshes of the Adriatic. The salt came first. The empire followed. Rome understood this with characteristic directness. The Via Salaria, the Salt Road, was one of the oldest roads in Italy, predating Rome itself, built to carry salt from the Adriatic coast to the interior. When Rome grew powerful enough, it didn't just use the road, it controlled it. Salt revenue funded Roman legions. Salt rations kept those legions fighting. The word soldier itself may derive from the Latin sal, because a soldier was, among other things, a man who received a salt allowance. An empire built on salt, moving it down roads named after it, paying armies with it. But salt wasn't only about power and preservation. It was about something deeper, something that every ancient civilization intuited without being able to explain. Salt doesn't rot. It doesn't decay. It preserves. In a world where everything organic eventually crumbled and dissolved, salt remained. This made it sacred. The Bible mentions salt more than 30 times. When God made a covenant with the Israelites, it was sealed with salt. The salt covenant, a bond meant to be as permanent as the mineral itself. To eat salt with someone was to enter into a relationship of loyalty and protection. The phrase, salt of the earth, which Jesus used in the Sermon on the Mount, was the highest possible compliment. To call someone essential, incorruptible, preserving. In ancient Egypt, salt was used in mummification, the literal preservation of the dead for eternity. In ancient Greece, salt was thrown on sacrificial animals before they were offered to the gods. In Japan, salt is still scattered at the entrance of Shinto shrines to purify the space. In dozens of cultures across every continent, salt appears in birth rituals, death rituals, wedding ceremonies, and religious rites. The mineral that preserved food also became the mineral that represented preservation itself, of life, of bonds, of the sacred. This was not unusual. This was how the ancient world worked. Salt and the art of control. Every government in history that has wanted to control its population has eventually figured out the same thing. Control the salt. You can't hide from a salt tax. You can avoid a tax on wine by not drinking wine. You can avoid a tax on silk by not wearing silk. But you cannot avoid salt. Every human body requires it to function. Every preserved food requires it to last. Salt is not optional, which makes it the perfect thing to tax. The Chinese figured this out first. The government's salt monopoly in China dates back to approximately 700 BC, making it possibly the oldest continuous government program in human history. For over 2,000 years, the Chinese state controlled salt production, distribution, and pricing. Salt revenue funded the construction of the Great Wall. It funded imperial armies. It funded the bureaucracy that administered one of the largest civilizations on Earth. Emperors rose and fell. Dynasties changed. Philosophies evolved. The salt monopoly remained. Salt smuggling in imperial China became a massive criminal enterprise with its own hierarchies, codes, and enforcement mechanisms. The gangs that controlled illegal salt distribution were sometimes powerful enough to challenge regional governments. Several of the leaders of major Chinese rebellions, including the rebellion that ended the Tang dynasty in the 9th century, began their careers as salt smugglers. The men who destabilized one of the most powerful states in history started out moving contraband seasoning. The pattern repeated itself everywhere salt was controlled. Different governments, different centuries, different languages. The same lesson. Make something essential scarce, and you manufacture criminals out of ordinary people just trying to eat. Across the Sahara, salt was so valuable it was traded literally weight for weight against gold. The great city of Timbuktu, which most people think of as a byword for remoteness, was in reality one of the wealthiest cities in the medieval world, built at the crossroads of two trade routes, gold moving north from West Africa, salt moving south from the Saharan mines at Tagaza. The salt mines at Tagaza were so remote and so inhospitable that the workers who cut the salt slabs from the earth lived in houses built from salt blocks because there was no other building material available for hundreds of miles. They ate food brought in from outside, drank water carried across the desert, and cut salt until they died or were replaced. A pound of salt bought a pound of gold. The men who cut it saw almost none of that wealth. In medieval Europe, salt was worth fighting wars over. Literally, the city of Salzburg, whose name means salt fortress, was built to control the Alpine salt mines that supplied much of Central Europe. Venice and Genoa fought repeated naval wars throughout the 13th and 14th centuries, and salt monopolies were among the central prizes. The War of Chioggia in 1378 was fought substantially over control of salt production in the Adriatic. Men died by the thousands so that one city rather than another could collect the tax on salt. In France, the gabelle, the royal salt tax, became one of the most hated institutions in the kingdom. Every person over 8 was required to purchase a minimum salt ration from government storehouses at government prices, regardless of need or ability to pay. The tax was applied unevenly. Some regions paid far more than others, creating a black market that the state suppressed with executions and galley sentences. Tens of thousands of people were imprisoned or killed for salt smuggling over the centuries the gabelle existed. When the French Revolution came, the abolition of the gabelle was one of the first acts of the new National Assembly. The mineral that everyone needed had been used to extract money from everyone who had none. The revolution was made of many causes. Salt was one of them. Salt, slavery, and the American Civil War. Salt doesn't appear in most histories of the American Civil War. It should. When the war began in 1861, the Confederacy controlled the vast majority of American salt production. The great salt works at Saltville, Virginia, and along the Gulf Coast were in Confederate territory. The Union had some production in the North, but nothing close to what was needed to supply armies and preserve food for the civilian population. Salt became a strategic military resource of the First Order. Confederate armies moved with salt wagons alongside ammunition wagons. Union commanders understood that destroying Confederate salt works was as valuable as destroying railroads or ammunition depots. But salt's role in the Civil War went deeper than logistics. In the antebellum South, salt had been one of the tools of slavery itself. Enslaved people on large plantations were issued weekly salt rations by their enslavers, enough to preserve the food they were given, enough to keep their bodies functional for the labor demanded of them. The salt ration was controlled precisely. Too little, and the enslaved person became sick and unproductive. Too much, and they had something to trade, something that gave them marginal economic agency. The salt ration was calibrated to keep people alive and dependent, nothing more. In 1864, Union cavalry raided Saltville, Virginia, one of the most important salt production centers in the Confederacy. A second raid later that year destroyed the salt works almost completely. Salt prices in the South rose by more than 1,000%. Women across the Confederacy rioted. In Savannah, in Augusta, in Mobile, crowds forced open warehouses and took salt by force. The Confederate government found itself facing civilian uprisings over a mineral. The Union's control of salt supply was one of the unglamorous, unsung advantages that helped it win the war. History remembers the battles. The salt wagons are forgotten. Gandhi's March, April 5th, 1930. The village of Dandi on the coast of the Arabian Sea in western India. A 70-year-old man in a white dhoti and sandals, carrying a simple walking stick, reaches down and picks up a small lump of natural salt from the beach. With that gesture, he breaks the law. The British Salt Act of 1882 made it illegal for Indians to produce or collect salt without paying a tax to the British government and purchasing salt only from British licensed vendors. This applied to salt that formed naturally on beaches across the Indian coastline. Salt that had been there for millions of years. Salt that Indians had collected freely for thousands of years before the British arrived. Now it required a license. Now it required payment. Now it belonged to the crown. Gandhi had chosen salt deliberately and with great strategic intelligence. His advisors had initially been skeptical. Salt seemed too mundane, too minor a grievance to anchor a mass movement. Gandhi understood something they didn't. Salt was the one thing that touched every Indian regardless of caste, class, religion, or region. The poorest untouchable and the wealthiest Maharaja both needed salt. The tax fell on everyone equally, which meant the injustice was felt by everyone equally. The Salt March covered 240 miles over 24 days. Gandhi and 78 followers walked from his ashram in Ahmedabad to the sea at Dandi. Tens of thousands of people lined the route to watch them pass. Newspapers around the world covered the march in real time. By the time Gandhi reached the coast, the march had become a global news event. When he picked up that lump of salt, civil disobedience spread across India almost immediately. Thousands of Indians walked to beaches and collected salt illegally. The British arrested Gandhi within weeks. Then came Dharasana. On May 21st, 1930, a column of 2,500 volunteers marched toward the government salt works at Dharasana. They had no weapons. They intended to walk in, pick up salt, and be arrested. British-commanded Indian police waited for them with steel-tipped lathis, 5-foot wooden clubs. What followed was witnessed by American journalist Webb Miller, whose dispatch was published in over 1,300 newspapers worldwide. The volunteers marched forward in columns. The police beat them to the ground. They did not fight back. They did not run. Those who could stand got up and walked forward again. Those who couldn't were carried away and replaced by the next column. For hours in the Gujarat heat, police beat nonviolent protesters who simply kept walking forward. Miller's report ended. In 18 years of reporting in 22 countries, I have never witnessed such harrowing scenes as at Dharasana. The images went around the world. The moral authority of the British Empire collapsed in ways that military resistance could never have achieved. Within 17 years, India was independent. Gandhi chose salt, and salt helped end the British Empire, the mineral that became invisible. Today, salt costs almost nothing. The average American buys a kilogram of table salt for less than $1. We produce approximately 300 million tons of salt per year. Most of it doesn't go into food at all. It goes into chemical manufacturing, road de-icing, and water treatment. Salt is so abundant, so cheap, so completely taken for granted that it has become invisible. But the biology hasn't changed. The human body still requires sodium to function, to regulate fluid balance, to transmit nerve signals, to contract muscles. Too little salt, and the body shuts down. Ancient armies knew this. Modern sports scientists know this. The mineral that once funded empires is now something athletes drink, dissolved in water after a workout. The modern processed food industry has hidden salt so effectively that most people have no idea how much they're consuming. The recommended daily intake of sodium is around 2,300 milligrams. The average American consumes around 3,400. Most of that excess comes not from the salt shaker, but from processed foods: bread, cheese, canned soups, breakfast cereals, deli meats, where salt is added not primarily for taste, but for texture, shelf life, and the same preservative function it has served for 8,000 years. The food industry knows that salt, like sugar, creates craving. A product with the right salt level is harder to stop eating than one without it. Food scientists spend enormous resources identifying the precise sodium concentrations that maximize consumption, what the industry calls the bliss point. The ancient salt merchant who discovered that salted food kept people coming back for more would have understood immediately. The mineral that built empires is now quietly embedded in everything you eat. You can't see it. You can't taste it individually. You just keep reaching for more. Finale. A world without salt. No preserved food, which means no civilization beyond the immediate harvest. No Roman Empire built on salt revenues and salt-paid legions. No Venice, no Genoa, no medieval trading empires. No Timbuktu at the crossroads of gold and salt. The French Revolution, if it came at all, comes differently, without the gabelle as the grievance that united the population. The American Civil War plays out with different logistics, possibly a different outcome. Gandhi chooses a different symbol, or finds that no single symbol works quite as well. One mineral, found in every ocean, under every continent, on the surface of every dried lakebed on Earth. But here is the thing about salt that makes it different from every other story in this series. Sugar, coffee, tea, potatoes, all of them came from somewhere specific, traveled somewhere else, and transformed the world through that journey. Salt was everywhere. It was not rare. The scarcity was artificial, created and maintained by governments and monopolies because controlling salt meant controlling people. The most powerful form of control is not controlling something rare. It is controlling something common, something everyone needs, something no one can do without. Salt taught the ancient world this lesson. Every government that came after learned it. The question worth asking is, what are the salts of our time? What are the things so common, so necessary, so completely embedded in daily life that whoever controls them controls us? And we don't even notice. We stopped noticing salt centuries ago. We haven't stopped being controlled by its modern equivalent.